Now let us begin this journey, bishop and people. This journey of the Church of Rome, which is the one that presides in charity over all the churches. A journey of brotherhood, love, and trust among us. Pope Francis after Ubi et Orbi blessing. Quotation from Bishop Ignatius of Antioch. Chapter 11, The Field Hospital. This is my summary of Paul Collins' book, Absolute Power. Conclave. A conclave was held on the 12th of May 2013. There were 17 days of praeticere, in which there was an informal discussion among cardinals about the possible next pope. George Mario Bergoglio became Pope Francis, winning 90 out of 115 votes. He was the first Jesuit and Argentinian to become pope. He chose not to wear the papal regalia, and right after his election, claims surfaced that Francis supported the military junta by betraying 2 Jesuits in Argentina between 1976 to 1982. These claims originated from the journalist Horatio Verbitsky, who actually had links with the military junta himself. Context: George Mario Bergoglio was born to Italian Argentinians, and he became a Jesuit in 1958. He studied philosophy and the humanities for 3 years and theology for 4 years. Later, he taught literature and psychology for 3 years in Jesuit high schools. In 1969, he was ordained to become a priest, and in 1973 to 1979, at age 36, he became the Argentinian provincial of the Jesuits, being head of all Jesuits in Argentina and Uruguay. During this time, liberation theology was in full influence in South America, and this drove Jesuits to teach in the slums as opposed to elite schools. Bergoglio's family were supporters of the Peron government, which was pioneered by Juan Peron and his wife, and combined elements of militarism, fascism, socialism, and the Catholic faith. In the 70s, there was a dirty war characterized by terrorism, coup d'etats, the disappearance of 30,000 political dissidents, and the invasion of the Falkland Islands in 1982, which led to war with the United Kingdom. The junta collapsed in 1983. Bergoglio sided with tradition as opposed to liberation theology at this time period, and he confessed that he wasn't experienced back then, making abrupt and bad decisions which led to the kidnapping of Jesuit priests in 1976 by the School of Naval Mechanics, or ESMA. He worked tirelessly to try and free them, confronting the head of the Navy. After 1979, he worked 6 years as a theology lecturer and went to Germany to gain his doctorate in 1986. And in 1990, Jesuits instructed him to live in Cordoba, which was 700 kilometers away from Buenos Aires, and this isolated him. Through this time, he became influenced more and more so by liberation theology, especially the concept of structural sin. In 1992, he became the auxiliary bishop for Antonio Quaracino and a coadjutor archbishop in 1998. And finally, by 2001, he became cardinal and archbishop of Buenos Aires. Bergoglio lived in a humble small apartment and took public transport, and also appointed priests to live in the slums and devote themselves to social justice. During his time as archbishop, he divested the archdiocese bank shares, and this helped to fix the finances. In 2005, he was appointed as president of the Argentinian Bishops' Conference and ran into opposition with the left-wing government. President Nestor Kirchner and his wife/successor Cristina, whom had wanted gay marriage in 2010. Bergoglio proposed a compromise to support civil union but not marriage, but the conference disagreed. Bergoglio also chaired the drafting committee at CHILEM, or the Latin American and Caribbean Bishops' Conference in 2007. This culminated in the Aparedica document, which aimed to help the poor and address environmental issues like the destruction of the Amazon. Bergoglio as Pope Francis. He abandoned the papal limousine, paid his own bills at the place he stayed prior to the conclave, and didn't live in the papal palace after the conclave, instead living in a smaller suite. On the first Holy Thursday as Pope, he washed the feet of prisoners, and he invited homeless people into the Vatican for meals, showers, and restrooms. In June of 2013, he created the advisory group of 8 cardinals, which represented all continents. In September of 2013, he formed the Council of Cardinals, designed to reform Pope John XXIII's Pasta Bonus, a document of reform of the Roman Curia. Pope Francis also appointed the diplomat and nuncio Pietro Parolin to be Secretary of State. Parolin negotiated for the reconciliation between the United States and Cuba, of which Pope Francis sent letters to Obama and Raul Castro to initiate dialogue, and the Pope also normalized relations with Communist China. Evangelii Gaudium, Joy of the Gospel, 2014. This was a document by the Pope which desired the Church to evangelize and proclaim the gospel through outreach, helping the poor and the sick via discipleship. The Pope rejected trickle-down economics, condemned Catholics who felt superior to others for observing certain rules, desiring a church with open doors and a church which is all for the poor. He also covered ecological theology, faith, reason, preaching, science, and finally relations with Judaism and ecumenism. Laudato si mi Signore. Praise be to you, my Lord. 2015. The title was not written in Latin, but in the medieval Tuscan spoken by St. Francis of Assisi. It talked about ecological theology, how in Genesis there is a sacred relationship between God, one's neighbor, and the earth. He rejected ideas of anthropocentrism or human dominance over nature, but rather encourages the mutual responsibility between them. Francis also condemned placing too much trust on technological solutions, since these only serve to support powerful organizations, and that the trajectory we are all heading towards would lead only to environmental collapse. He condemned individuals who think overpopulation is the issue, to which Francis believes it to be an excuse to protect the West from its own overconsumption, placing the blame at massive multi-conglomerate consumerism. Ellis helped to link care for the poor with social justice environmentalism, recognizing ecological issues and how it's interconnected with poverty. The Synod of Bishops on the Family, announced by the Pope in 2013, there were 2 sessions in 2014 and 15, and the Pope encouraged disagreement in the discussion about communion for divorce/remarried Catholics, language used surrounding homosexuality and polygamy. Traditional positions argued for no communion for divorcees, without annulment for the first marriage triumphing the second. In the 1970s, Catholics supported good conscience, and after talking to a priest, they could return to communion. communion. Familiares Consortio by Pope John Paul II in 1981 allowed for communion if they lived as brother and sister. Francis supported Cardinal W. Casper's idea on guided penance by a priest before communion, but this was rejected by traditionalists who defended the indissolubility of the marriage doctrine. No agreement was reached. African polygamy was another issue condemned by Familiares Consortio. Ghana Archbishop C. Palmer Buckle took the perspective of polygamous wives who would be separated from their children. The outcome of these synods created a new department for family life and laity that replaced two pontifical councils. Amoris, Laetitia, Joy of Love, 2016. This was a response by the Pope to the synod, which recognized that moral truth is central and settled by unity of teaching in the magisterium, but that there are different ways to interpret the consequences of said teaching. He approved of the synods and decisions from conscience, but that it must be considered through discernment, which is a Jesuit idea whereby God's Spirit works throughout one's life, even for those who are not sanctified. In essence, this stems from the early church history whereby there are two approaches in dealing with theologically or morally dissident individuals, either to cast out or reinstate. The way of the church for Francis is that of mercy and reinstatement, not anathematizing. Cleaning finances. Pope Francis modernized the Vatican Bank by making it more accountable and audited by Deloitte. He also formed COSI, or the Committee on Finance and Administration, to clear curial opposition in 2013. He created the Council for the Economy in 2014 and Office of the Secretariat for the Economy, appointing Cardinal George Hell to be the prefect of the Secretariat of the Economy. Hell sorted out some finances but was opposed by the Roman Curia traditionalists and the Secretariat of State. After, Hell was charged with historical sex offences by Victorian police in 2017. Francis created the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors in 2014 to deal with child sex abuse and would work closely with local churches and the CDF. Come una madre amorevole, like a loving mother, 2016. This addressed the Roman Curia and opened inquiry into bishops who covered up sexual abuse or failed to act. The Pope also supported ordination of viri probati, men who are already married, especially in places with declining celibate priest ordination. In some places, the shortage of priests has led to importing priests from the Third World and resulting in a lower number of local war priests. Magnum, principium, 2017. Pope Francis gave local bishop conferences more control in translating for the liturgy after the disaster of the liturgicum authenticum imposed on the English-speaking world. And yeah, these are the important things that Pope Francis has done thus far. He is more focused on pastoral care, God's mercy and love, and that the church is a field hospital for sinners. So to sum up this entire book by Paul Collins, he makes an interesting idea as to the history of the papacy from at the time of the 1790s, where the papacy was threatened by the French Revolution and then subsequent rise of Napoleon, up to the ironic pinnacle of the First Vatican Council, whereby the Pope lost the papal states but gained ultimate power, or absolute power, supreme power, over the entire Catholic Church. Despite these, we hear of a lot of movements as a result from the times, whether it be Americanism, theological modernism, integralism, etc. And these movements, whether in support of traditionalism or in support of modernizing with the times, it kind of produces that classic trope of conservative versus progressive elements in the church. Of course, it's not as simple as that, but these create an interesting concept where the church is in a battle with not only the world, the outside world, but also with itself, with individuals who want the church to stay traditional or to reform the church. We also see the effects of time periods, such as I stated before, the French Revolution and Napoleon's rise, but we also see Risorgimento, where there is a drive for Italian independence. We see the effects of the First and Second World War and how the papacy basically desired neutrality, a policy of neutrality, for the sake of the Catholics that lived on both sides of either conflicts, and how the papacy started to grow out of that Italian culture, becoming more and more internationalized, affecting various places around the world, whether it be like in Argentina or Australia or Ireland or Mexico or China or Poland or Russia or the United States, etc., etc. This is very interesting, and ultimately culminated in the Second Vatican Council by Pope John the 23rd, because he wanted and desired the church to reform and to communicate, evangelize in the modern times, as opposed to staying shut off and isolated from an ever-changing culture. And yeah, it was especially most interesting in the likes of Pope John Paul II and Pope Francis, in how they implement the use of soft power. And yeah, ultimately it is hoped that the church would overcome issues like sex abuse scandal and introduce ideas like adding women to the priesthood or allowing more and more involvement of the laity, as in not just emphasizing religious organizations, but also involve more of the lay in the role of the church, and that there should be more transparency and openness in the church. And yeah, Paul Collins makes the interesting idea of a communion of communions, which talks about how the church originally started out as separate different churches, where some cities they might only have one church, and other cities like Rome, which had 1 million people, had many different churches, and these different churches each had their own elders, presbyters, whom would become bishops, the successors of the apostles. That the idea of the papacy developed hundreds of years later from the successor of Peter in Rome. But yeah, this has been an interesting book looking at the development of the church, how it nearly went extinct, how it rose in power but simultaneously lost power in temporal matters, and then how the church was able to rebound and reform and surpass the issues that it was dealing with in the times. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this entire summary, and it was very interesting. Thanks for watching ultimately. Bye bye.